Every once in a while, when things are going really well, it's good to step back and take stock of all the progress you've made. In Cardano, we can look around and say that the network has never been in better shape. We have some huge improvements coming with the Vasil CIPs. We're about to make some big steps forward in scaling with pipelining and eventually input endorsers. We're seeing insane demand for Cardano projects, and things have never looked better on the regulatory front. Now's a good time to admit that Cardano is in a pretty good place. Ready?
יאללה, נצא לדרך.
Thank you to Michael for the intro. Today we're going to discuss a little bit more about the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, the Cornucopias mint, Binance falling under the SEC microscope, Custodia actually suing the Federal Reserve, and Solana getting a little less than desirable technical risk score. If you like to lean over a wood rail fence and look at long shadows in a high alpine meadow, so basically if you're the human embodiment of a Coors commercial from the 1980s, or if you're enjoying these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. I've said it a bunch of times this week, but the last two epochs have been amazing. We were supposed to mint 10.3 and 10.1 blocks. Instead, we had a crazy luck factor and we minted 13 blocks and 17 blocks. Heads up, guys. Next week, we are going to miss some episodes. We're going to miss some videos. This doesn't happen very often. Next week is going to be one of those weeks because I have now spent almost 2 months on continent number 2, and I've already accomplished the big things I wanted to accomplish this time. So it's now time to move back to continent number 1, and that's kind of a long trip. So I'm going to have to miss a few videos next week. I think it may just be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but we'll see how it goes. So while I was making my video last night about the Lummis-Gillibrand Responsible Financial Innovation Act, we also got a Charles video about this bill. I don't know about you guys, but I miss these Charles videos. I think they're great. I miss them. I kind of understand why they're not happening right now as much, but I do miss them. I think a lot of people probably agree. But this video pointed out, I think, some important things about the bill. So the biggest and most important thing is that Charles, I think, understands a lot better than the vast majority of the crypto crowd that this bill is not going to pass. the PDF you look at when you look at a copy of the bill from today or yesterday is not going to become law. This form of the bill is not going to become law. What Charles thinks is going to happen is that the Biden administration working group is going to produce their work product. And we've covered exactly which parts of the Biden administration are going to be involved in that. It's basically everybody. We did a couple different episodes where we talked about all the different parties. Of course, the usual suspects, Treasury, SEC, CFTC, FinCEN. There's a whole laundry list of agencies and groups that are going to be involved in this. But they're going to produce some kind of giant report or collections of reports, and they're probably going to have some different positions than this Lummis-Gillibrand bill. They're going to take different positions on different issues, and these two things are going to collide. The Lummis-Gillibrand position on a lot of these issues is going to collide with what the Biden administration wants. And they'll probably have differing viewpoints on a lot of these different issues. And what'll come out of that is some movement towards a consensus. What should the policy be on all these different issues? I mean, we didn't even cover all of the bill in yesterday's video, and we covered a lot of things. I mean, that was like a 34-minute video. That's much longer than the normal videos we do on this channel. And we didn't even cover the whole bill. That's because it was a 69-page document. And Charles points out in this video, it sounds like the earlier drafts of the bill were even much longer than that. When he was in DC talking with the senators and all the different groups and everybody involved, The bill was even longer, and it was just growing at that point. But I think the important thing is, and Charles kind of points out as well, I believe, that the Lummis-Gillibrand bill is a great place to start this conversation. It's a great start to this discourse. Charles does make some strong observations about some things that seem to be missing from the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. And we're going to kind of go in ascending order of importance here. We're going to go from maybe the more minor items up to the most important item. So he first points out that we don't really have a good framework for a transnational regime dealing with algorithmic law. We've got this situation currently. Crypto is obviously a very global business. People all over the globe might be dealing with some kind of DAO or smart contract. And we've currently got the situation where the DAO, the smart contract underlying the DAO, might do a certain number of things. And if there's some kind of a dispute, a court might come in and settle the matter in a way which is completely contrary to what the code might have dictated. The code might have done things A, B, and C. A court might come in and say, "Hey, we're the court of law that has jurisdiction here. We don't care what the code dictated. Here's what the law, according to us, says. We're settling this in terms of X, Y, and Z." So we have this conflict that's going to play out globally, where we had in the early days of crypto, especially when I first got into crypto, when I first got into Bitcoin back in that 2012, 2013, 2014 timeframe, there was a very strong notion that maybe code is law. And that's always been in the background. This whole crypto journey, code is law. The notion that maybe code is law has always been in the background, but we're going to have this global conflict playing out where a lot of people are that notion is going to inform their actions. They're going to be interacting with algorithmic things in the blockchain world, smart contracts and DAOs and blockchains themselves. And they're going to be acting on the premise that code is law. And then you've got a million jurisdictions globally, and any one of them at any point, if they have jurisdiction over a matter, they could say code is not law. We decide what the law is. This is a problem. This is going to be a problem globally. Charles thinks we need some kind of a movement towards a transnational regime of algorithmic law. The second item he mentions is that we still don't have consumer rights in crypto. He thinks we need them. We've talked about this on the channel before. We won't dive into that right now. The final matter he mentions is the big one, and that's that the bill still doesn't provide us with a definition of decentralization. The bill has these notions of entrepreneurial and managerial efforts that are primarily setting the price of an asset. And that sort of measure is being used in the bill to determine when the periodic reporting requirements for an ancillary asset are triggered and when they can be terminated. But the bill never comes out and says, hey, this is what decentralization is. If you look at the overview of the bill, which Charles actually covers in this video and which we covered in the video last night a tiny bit, if you look at the overview, when they talk about ancillary assets, they actually talk about decentralization, but that's not a part of the bill. That's just commentary on the bill. It's the overview of the bill. It's not actually part of the text that would become law if the bill were ever passed, or if the language from the bill were included in a later bill that's passed, which is, much more likely. So they never actually say, hey, if an asset is decentralized, it falls in this category. If it's not decentralized, it falls in this category. They don't say anything like that. What they say in the bill is, hey, we've got this extra category of ancillary assets, and if you don't pass the Howey test, but you meet these other categories that basically are like, hey, you're not trying to replicate an equity with this with this asset. You don't have things like, a share of the profit or a share of revenue or dividends or something like that. If you're not replicating the properties of an equity security, then we're going to call it an ancillary asset. And there's this path to be considered a commodity and not a security. But so people in the mainstream media have been describing this as, and they're all using notes from a media call, but they've been describing this as, if you're sufficiently decentralized, you're just a commodity. If you're not sufficiently decentralized, then you're either going to be a security, or if you're lucky, you fall in this ancillary asset category. But that's not what the bill says. The bill says, hey, if there was a violation of the Howey test and there were also crypto assets issued, and the crypto asset doesn't look like one of these securities that divvies up, shares of revenue or profit or something, or dividends from a business entity, then you can be an ancillary asset. The decentralization stuff all comes in with the Howey test, but they don't actually use decentralization as a criteria in the bill. Decentralization is not used as sort of a sorting hat to push all of these digital assets, these crypto assets, into categories of commodity, security, and ancillary asset. Based on the mainstream reports that came out today, where they were all operating off this one press call they had with, anonymous parties who I would guess are just staffers in the senators' offices. Based on that call, they all reported, hey, based on decentralization, the following crypto assets are going to be commodities. The following are going to be ancillary assets, and all the rest are going to be securities. That's not actually how it works in the bill. They don't use decentralization as a category in the bill for digital assets because they don't have a definition of decentralization. And I think Charles rightly points out, before this conversation, before this discourse about regulating crypto assets can get very far, we need a definition of decentralization. People actually need to be on the same page about what decentralization means. Yesterday, we talked about the minimum attack vector in Bitcoin and in Ethereum being very, very low, less than 5. What was it? 3 in the beacon chain in Ethereum and also in Bitcoin. In Cardano, it's something like 23. So by that decentralization measure, Cardano is much more decentralized. But we've also got a lot of other things that go into decentralization. Charles tells an interesting anecdote about this later on in the video. He says that Ledger had this experience where Ledger, of course, wanted to build out Ledger Live for Cardano, but they wanted to be paid for it. They wanted the Cardano ecosystem to pay for it. So they came to Cardano and they're like, okay, who's going to pay us to build out Ledger Live for Cardano? And Cardano, of course, was like, well, we have this catalyst process where the ecosystem actually decides, the community actually decides who gets the money. And apparently Ledger thought this was extremely bizarre because they were used to dealing with a single entity who would just say yes or no, you can have the money. They thought it was very bizarre. They had to go through this catalyst process. And Charles points out that this was so bizarre for them. And of course, Ledger has built out Ledger Live for a lot of other ecosystems. Maybe those ecosystems aren't so decentralized. And maybe somebody should just build a decentralization index and have a paper out on that soon. Of course, you're probably aware that Cardano is sponsoring work at a university that's going to produce this kind of index and this kind of paper, which of course is going to have some kind of criteria for decentralization that in the aggregate, I'm guessing is probably going to be a pretty good definition of decentralization. Once we start the process of all of us in crypto reaching a consensus about what criteria are included in this definition of decentralization, that's going to significantly change this conversation about what in crypto should be a commodity, what should be a security, what should fall into some other category. In the case of the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, it was this ancillary asset category, some intermediate category that kind of meets the sort of regulatory safe harbor framework that figures like Commissioner Hester Peirce of the SEC have been talking about for a couple of years now. That's kind of that ancillary asset kind of category where you have to do some reporting and things, and then once you're sufficiently decentralized, you are no longer going to be considered a security. That's where that ancillary, that's sort of the intellectual, conceptual antecedent of that ancillary asset category. But you can't really do it until you have a definition of decentralization. And once we have that definition, I think Cardano is going to fare pretty well under whatever we end up deciding that definition is going to be, because it's going to be really hard to have that definition and not consider the decentralization of validators. And among the large cap blockchains, I've said it a million times, but Cardano is doing quite well. And the supposedly very decentralized legacy blockchains, not looking so well. They're not doing so well, as we covered in that previous video. Overall, Charles said there's nothing in this bill that would make things difficult for IOG. He said they're a software company. There's nothing here that's going to make things difficult for us as a software company. He's really happy with the bill as a foundation for the conversation. And he characterized it as a balanced approach as the end of the beginning. And I think that's a good way to describe it. This is the end of the beginning of the conversation. Now we're going to move into the middle of the conversation where all of these things start colliding and we start actually reaching a consensus. Charles also mentioned they're going to debut a video about input endorsers at Consensus, and it'll tie together Mithril and a bunch of other concepts. And he said it's definitely going to cause some problems for the Cardano critics. We also just experienced the Cornucopias land mint, which to me was nothing if not a very strong testament to the intense and gigantic demand for Cardano projects. So in this mint, there were 9,758 people vying for 240 plots. That's right, almost 10,000 people vying for 240 plots. You can see here, I mean, these different tiers of this mint sold out in 5.5 seconds, approximately, under 5 seconds, under 3.5 seconds. This is a crazy amount of demand. And people had all kinds of emotions and opinions about the mint and whether or not it should have been a whitelisted raffle and all those kinds of things. But I think the important thing here is that there's a gigantic amount of demand for Cardano projects. A couple years ago, this is the kind of thing we fantasized about. We fantasized about Cardano projects debuting their assets just like this and experiencing this kind of demand. Shock was written on the face of no one as Binance found itself under the SEC microscope over its BNB token. This is a surprise to nobody. This is the most centralized blockchain, the most centralized token. It's meant to be centralized. The Binance Smart Chain is meant to run quickly and smoothly. It's meant to be completely centralized. On top of that, it's run by the Binance parent corporation, which also runs some gigantic centralized exchanges and itself is a gigantic commercial corporation. So no surprise, the SEC looks at this and says, this might be a security. It looks like a security when you look at the parent corporation and how centralized everything is. If decentralization is the thing that the crypto industry thinks gets us out of the Howey test, then of course, Binance Smart Chain would be the first blockchain that the SEC would be looking at. I actually like CZ as a personality in the crypto space. I think he's an interesting personality in the crypto space, and I don't find his sort of personality in the space to be offensive in any way. Certainly, you can differ in principle with Binance Smart Chain in terms of their approach to centralization versus decentralization. But I think CZ actually, I don't mind. I don't mind the way he presents himself and his company to the rest of the crypto space. But on the other hand, he's also made a lot of money doing this. So he's got a pretty good war chest to fight the SEC as well. Caitlin Long's Custodia Bank has finally sued the Federal Reserve. You'll remember Custodia Bank used to be called Avanti Bank, and it's a Wyoming special purpose depository institution, a Wyoming speedy bank. These are meant to be crypto banks, to create a bridge between the crypto world and the normal fiat payment world. But in order to do that, they need to access Fed payment systems. They can't do that unless they have a Federal Reserve master account. And the Federal Reserve will not grant them a master account. This is something that's supposed to take something like 5 to 7 days, and they have been applying forever. They say the Federal Reserve has a legal obligation to act within a year, and itself says they should just take 5 to 7 days, but they keep refusing to process the application. So Kaylin Long is finally suing them, and she has a little money to do so. It looks like in March of 2021, she raised a Series A where she ended up with $44 million from entities like Binance.us, Coinbase Ventures, Morgan Creek, Slow Ventures, and Susquehanna. So she's probably got a little bit of money, a little bit of a litigation war chest here to try to get the Federal Reserve moving. I'm sure this is not something she wanted to do. I don't think any bank wants to be in litigation with the Federal Reserve, but if they just won't let you be a bank, you're not really left with any other course of action. Finally, it looks like the move fast and break things strategy does exactly what it advertises. It actually breaks things. DeFi Safety has given Solana the second worst final technical risk score of the 15 chains that they have reviewed. Only Ronin Network, which has famously had very serious security problems, has a lower score at this point. This is due to repeated downtime. Solana, is anybody surprised that this entity, DeFi Safety, is giving them the second worst final technical risk score they've ever handed out? Solana, things are not looking great for one of Cardano's big competitors. I hope you're having a great week, and I will talk to you tomorrow.